In a quiet American suburb where everything seemed picture perfect, a teenage boy walking home became the target of a rogue police officer. But what that officer didn't know, the boy's father wasn't just any man. He was a silent storm, a ghost in government files, a protector trained in shadows. What followed wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. Today's story is about dignity, quiet strength, and how one family changed an entire town without firing a single shot. If you believe that real power doesn't need to shout and that justice starts with standing your ground, this is a story you need to hear. If this moved you, hit that like button, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories like this. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment that reminds us. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all. The sun hovered low over the tree-lined streets of Brookside Ridge, casting a warm amber glow on the manicured lawns and colonial-style homes that lined the sidewalks. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like a postcard, quiet, orderly, and serene. But beneath that polished surface, something far more insidious stirred. Miles Carter walked calmly down Sycamore Lane, earbuds in, hands tucked into the pockets of his windbreaker. It was a Friday afternoon. School had let out early for a faculty conference, and he had chosen to walk home rather than take the bus. The route was longer, but the solitude gave him time to think. Something Miles did often. At 16, he carried himself with a quiet, observant composure beyond his years. Teachers often remarked that he was mature, disciplined, unusually calm. His parents, Marcus and Vanessa Carter, had instilled in him early the value of self-control, especially in this town. As he approached the intersection near Willow Creek Park, the hum of tires on pavement slowed behind him. A patrol car crept up beside the sidewalk. The engine purred low, almost predatory. Miles didn't turn his head at first. He'd seen this car before. Brookside Ridge PD. He told himself to keep walking, keep breathing, stay calm. "Hey!" a sharp voice barked. Stop right there!" Miles halted, the grip on his breath tightening. He pulled out one earbud and slowly turned toward the car. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Officer Brent Malloy. Malloy was 38, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, and perpetually tight-lipped. His uniform was pressed to perfection, badge gleaming in the sunlight. But what stood out most were his eyes, narrowed, suspicious, scanning Miles with a look that had nothing to do with crime and everything to do with assumption. "What are you doing around here?" Malloy asked, hand resting on his utility belt. Miles blinked. "Walking home, sir." "Home?" Malloy repeated, like the idea itself was suspicious. "Where exactly is home?" Miles gestured up the road. "Maplewood Drive. I live there with my parents." Malloy gave a tight nod, not moving. "Got any ID on you?" Miles hesitated. "I'm in high school. I have my student ID in my backpack." "Let's see it." With slow, deliberate motion, just as his father had taught him, Miles unzipped his backpack, retrieved his school ID, and handed it over. Malloy snatched it and glanced at the card. "Miles Carter," he read aloud, "Brookside Ridge High." He said the school name like it tasted sour. "You cut class today?" he asked. "No, sir. We had early dismissal." Malloy nodded again, this time slower, stepping in just a bit closer. "Funny. You seem real calm for someone being questioned by police." Miles didn't respond. He knew better. "You know, I've never seen you around this part of town," Malloy added, circling slightly, eyeing the boy's sneakers, backpack, posture. "And this neighborhood's had some break-ins recently. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Miles' jaw tensed. "No, sir. I don't know anything about that." Malloy's hand lingered near his holster. "Mind if I take a look in your bag?" Miles hesitated. His parents had gone over this kind of moment in detail. His father, Marcus, had spoken plainly about his rights. But there was a difference between legal theory and a suburban sidewalk where you stood alone in front of a cop with a badge and a history. "I'd prefer not to, sir," Miles said carefully, "unless you have a warrant." The air snapped tense. Malloy's eyes narrowed. "What's that attitude supposed to mean?" "It's not attitude, sir," Miles said steady. "Just my rights." Malloy stepped forward, nose inches from Miles' face. "Let me tell you something, kid. When a police officer gives you a lawful command, you follow it. You don't talk back like some punk lawyer in training." "I didn't do anything wrong," Miles said, quieter now. "I'm just trying to go home." A passing car slowed. A woman inside looked toward the scene but drove on. Miles could feel his heart hammering against his ribs now. The sidewalk felt too exposed, too wide, too dangerous. And then, a voice from across the street. "Miles?" It was Autumn Reyes. She stood half a block down, cell phone in hand, eyebrows raised. Autumn was in his AP government class, sharp as a tack and always asking the hardest questions. Her dad was a well-known civil rights attorney, and today she had her phone pointed directly at Officer Malloy. "You okay?" she called out. Miles nodded slightly, unsure whether to be relieved or afraid for her now too. Malloy turned. "Move along, miss. Nothing to see here." Autumn didn't move. "Actually, I'm just recording. For everyone's safety." Malloy's jaw clenched. "This is police business. And I'm on public property," she shot back. "Same as him." Miles saw something change in Malloy's face. Frustration, maybe. Maybe something darker. The kind of look a man gave when he thought his authority was being challenged. But Autumn didn't back down. The camera stayed trained on him like a silent witness. "I'll be filing this footage with my dad," she added, "and with your department." Malloy took one long, hard breath. Then almost grudgingly, he stepped back. "You can go," he said to Miles. This time, Miles didn't speak. He took his ID, turned and walked, not fast, not slow, just steady. Each step away from that sidewalk felt like dragging his body out of quicksand. When he reached Autumn, she lowered the phone and looked at him with quiet concern. "You good?" she asked. Miles gave the smallest nod. "Thanks." They didn't say much more, just kept walking toward Maplewood Drive. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Brookside Ridge as Miles Carter walked home, his mind replaying the encounter with Officer Brent Malloy. The officer's accusatory tone, the unwarranted suspicion, it was a scenario Miles had been prepared for, thanks to the lessons instilled by his father, Marcus Carter. Marcus, a 51-year-old, highly skilled, still active classified military operative, had always emphasized the importance of composure and dignity. His background was top secret, even from neighbors, but his discipline and quiet strength were evident in every aspect of his life. He had taught Miles that true strength lay not in aggression, but in the ability to remain calm under pressure. As Miles entered their home, Vanessa Carter, his 49-year-old mother and a graceful, intelligent hospital administrator, greeted him with a warm smile. She was the public face of the family and a pillar of quiet strength. Noticing the tension in Miles's demeanor, she asked, "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Miles nodded, offering a small smile. "Yeah, just a long day." Later that evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Marcus noticed Miles's uncharacteristic silence. "Something on your mind, son?" he inquired. Miles hesitated, then recounted the incident with Officer Malloy. Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Miles finished, Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Remember, it's not about how others treat you, but how you respond. Dignity and composure are your greatest allies." The following day at school, Autumn Reyes, Miles's classmate and aspiring journalist, approached him. "I saw what happened," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I recorded it. We need to talk about it." Miles appreciated her support but remained cautious. "Thanks, Autumn. Let's discuss it after school." That afternoon, they met at a local cafe. Autumn shared the video footage capturing the unjust treatment Miles had endured. "This needs to be addressed," she insisted. Miles nodded, recalling his father's words. "We'll handle it the right way." Together, they planned to present the evidence to the school administration and, if necessary, the local authorities. Miles's calm demeanor and strategic approach, a testament to his father's teachings, would guide them through the challenges ahead. Officer Brent Malloy leaned against the edge of his patrol cruiser, arms folded, watching Miles Carter walk away with that same unreadable calm that had unsettled him from the start. The nerve of that kid, so composed, so measured, even while being humiliated. It wasn't just defiance, it was something deeper, something taught. Malloy couldn't shake the comment Miles had made during their earlier confrontation. "You might want to look into my father's background before you assume too much." It wasn't said with arrogance, but with a kind of quiet warning, and that dug at Malloy like a splinter. Later that evening, with a beer sweating on the desk beside his keyboard, Malloy opened his laptop and ran Marcus Carter's name through the department's internal database. Nothing popped up at first, just a driver's license, vehicle registration, and a few homeowner records. Nothing interesting. But when he tried to access military records through the department's linked DoD portal, a screen flashed red. "Access restricted. This file is classified. Clearance level, Omega Black. Unauthorized attempts will be logged." Malloy blinked. He tried a backdoor trick he'd learned during his brief stint in MP training, cross-checking deployments from the early 2000s with known black operatives. Again, redactions. Pages upon pages of blacked-out lines. Operation names redacted. Affiliations unknown. All roads led nowhere. He picked up the phone and called an old buddy still working base security at Quantico. "Hey, I need a quiet favor," Malloy said, masking his urgency. "You ever hear of a guy named Marcus Carter? Supposedly ex-military, lives up in Brookside Ridge?" There was a pause, then a low exhale. "Malloy, I don't know who told you that name, but walk away. Seriously, if it's the Marcus Carter I'm thinking of, you don't want any part of that. And you sure as hell shouldn't be sniffing around his past. That man's not retired. Let's just say he's active in ways you'll never understand." Click. Malloy stared at the phone. Suddenly, his petty obsession with Miles Carter, this teenager who had said nothing but stood taller than men twice his age, began to take on a darker, more dangerous shape. Officer Brent Malloy couldn't sleep that night. He paced the narrow kitchen of his bachelor apartment, replaying every moment of his encounter with Miles Carter. Something about that kid's posture, his restraint, his calm under pressure. It wasn't learned from YouTube or some motivational podcast. Number that kind of discipline was drilled in, passed down, refined over years. And now there was Marcus Carter, a man living in Brookside Ridge for nearly 5 years, with no social footprint, no LinkedIn, no military service records that could be confirmed, no Facebook page, not even a damn family Christmas photo online. Just an occasional sighting, early morning jogs, back porch barbecues, nods at the mailbox. People called him reserved, polite, quiet. But Malloy saw something else in that silence. Determined to dig deeper, Malloy used a workaround the IT guys joked about at the station, pinging old defense contractor payroll logs. It was risky, but he didn't care. When the name Marcus Carter returned a match, once tied to a firm called Aegis Vector with no public contracts and a Virginia address blacked out even in IRS filings, Malloy's hands trembled. It got worse. He tried running facial recognition on an old DMV photo of Marcus Carter through a public algorithm. The system flagged one blurry match, a classified group photo from a 2007 embassy security detail in Turkey. Every other face in the image was tagged. Marcus's was labeled only unknown blackout. The paranoia crept in fast. Was this man CIA, JSOC, NSA? Malloy didn't know, but whatever Marcus Carter was, he wasn't just someone's dad working a quiet job. He was someone the government was still protecting, maybe still using, and that made Miles Carter more than just another teenager with a sharp tongue. It made him a threat. Malloy sat back, sweat starting to beat along his hairline. He wasn't going to let this go. Not because he had proof of wrongdoing, there was none, but because something in Marcus Carter's secrecy made Malloy feel small. And Officer Brent Malloy had spent his whole life trying to outrun that feeling. The next morning in Brookside Ridge was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that settles before a storm. Across town in the Carter household, Miles sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a textbook, though his eyes weren't really reading. He knew something was coming. His father had felt it too. Marcus Carter stood by the window, coffee in hand, scanning the street like a man who'd done this before, in another life, in other countries, under very different threats. "They're not going to stop," Miles said softly, his voice calm but clear. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He just sipped his coffee, eyes still scanning the tree-lined street. "Son," he finally said, "in life, when people don't understand something, they'll try to control it, expose it, or destroy it." Miles looked up at him. "Which one do you think Malloy's going to try?" "All of them." It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Marcus had seen this exact sequence unfold in volatile regions overseas, except now it was unfolding in the suburbs, and the battlefield wasn't Kabul or Khartoum, but a quiet Virginia street. And this time, the enemy wasn't armed rebels. It was ego and insecurity wrapped in a badge. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew Malloy's profile. Former military dropout, washed out during assessment training, bitter, insecure, and power-hungry. The kind of man who never got over being told, "You're not good enough," especially by institutions like the one Marcus had risen through in complete silence and unmatched precision. Vanessa Carter entered the room, her expression calm but sharp. "I got a call from HR," she said. "Someone asked if I had ever used Marcus's name on hospital security clearance forms. It felt strange, probing." Marcus exchanged a glance with her. That wasn't just coincidence. The background digging had started. "They're trying to flush me out," Marcus muttered. "Make it look like we're hiding something." Vanessa placed her hand gently on his. "We're not hiding. You've earned your peace. You served this country. You protected people who'll never even know your name." He nodded, though his jaw remained tight. But they both knew. Peace was a privilege, not a guarantee. Especially when you're black. Especially when you're powerful and don't fit into the neat boxes people expect. Outside, a police cruiser slowly rolled past the house. Miles watched through the blinds, his fingers tightening around his pencil. "Let them dig," Marcus finally said. "All they'll find is silence and redactions. I've lived my whole life between the lines." "But what if they twist it?" Miles asked. "Then we let them try," Marcus replied. "Because when the truth comes out, it won't be because they found it. It'll be because we chose the time and place to show it." At the Brookside Ridge Police Department, Officer Brent Malloy hunched over his desk, frustration simmering just below the surface. His monitor glowed with official documents, or rather, the lack thereof. The moment he had keyed in Marcus Carter into the federal systems, he expected to find something, anything that could validate his suspicion. But instead, all he hit was one digital brick wall after another. Redacted, redacted, classified. Malloy growled, scrolling through endless blacked-out fields. Who the hell is this guy? He leaned back in his chair, tossing his pen across the desk. A part of him had hoped Marcus was just another middle-class fraud, faking respectability in a neighborhood too polished for his liking. But now Malloy knew something was off, dangerously off. He called over the department's tech officer. Run a cross-check through DARPA, Homeland, even Black Ops databases if you have to. I want to know where this guy served, who trained him, what he did. The tech looked nervous. Malloy, I've already tried. Some of these logs are behind encryption levels we're not even cleared to view. I didn't ask if it was legal, Malloy snapped. I asked if it was possible. Back in the Carter home, the family prepared for their day with deliberate care. Vanessa tied her hair into a low bun, slipping into her scrubs with the kind of grace that made her presence in the hospital both commanding and calming. Marcus packed Miles's lunch the way he always had, routine, quiet, thoughtful. Even in the face of surveillance, they held on to the dignity of normalcy. But Miles could feel it. The tension wasn't just outside their door. It followed them into every hallway at school, into every glance from neighbors, every pause in conversation at the grocery store. Autumn Reyes felt it too. Sitting across from Miles during lunch, she tapped her fingers nervously on the table. My dad says the kind of clearance your father has is higher than some cabinet members, she whispered. He called in a few favors. Every file linked to Marcus Carter's name is protected by a triple-level authentication barrier. That's black-tier stuff. Miles sighed, looking down at his sandwich. I never even knew half of what he did. I just knew he was quiet and serious. Autumn leaned in. But you did say something to Malloy, right? About your dad? Miles nodded. He kept pushing. I said my dad served and left it at that. I didn't expect him to spiral. Well, she said, lowering her voice, he spiraled hard. I heard he filed a request with the State Fusion Center to investigate potential foreign influence. He's trying to paint your dad as a threat. That hit Miles like a gut punch, not because he was surprised, but because it confirmed something he feared. Malloy wasn't just curious. He was on a mission, and that made him dangerous. That night, Marcus sat alone in the den, a worn file folder in his lap, one of the few unclassified pieces he still kept. Inside were grainy photographs, maps with red markers, and a letter from a fallen teammate, written in case he never returned. He thumbed through it, pausing on a photograph. Young Marcus in a desert uniform, standing beside a child no older than Miles, both saluting the camera with quiet pride. Vanessa entered, wordless at first, then sat beside him. They're digging deeper, she said softly. I know, he replied. What do we do? Marcus looked over at her, eyes weary but focused. We don't run. We don't hide. We do what we've always done. We hold our ground, with discipline, with purpose, with truth. Then he glanced at the door. And when the time comes, we let them see who I really am. Brookside Ridge, Virginia, wore its perfection like a pressed white shirt, neat, proper, and tailored to keep out what didn't fit. But something had shifted. People didn't say it aloud, but they felt it, especially Officer Brent Malloy. For weeks, ever since the incident on Hanover Street, Malloy's mind had been consumed by one name, Marcus Carter. It started with Miles, a kid, sure, calm, respectful, almost too perfect. But Malloy knew better, knew there had to be a reason the boy didn't flinch, didn't fold under pressure. And the way he'd mentioned his father, that quiet threat about classified records and a military past, that hadn't sat right. Malloy had tried the usual channels, pulled strings at the DMV, called up a buddy at the local FBI liaison's office. Nothing. Every background check on Marcus Carter came up with the same eerie silence. Restricted access, classified. The man didn't even have a typical driver's license renewal file. It only made Malloy more obsessed. He told himself it was about public safety, about uncovering the truth. But in reality, it was personal. He hated being stonewalled, hated being made to feel small. And so it began. He started watching the Carters. At first, it was just patrol drive-bys, nothing out of protocol. But soon it turned into nights spent parked 3 blocks away, camera lens trained on their porch. Then he began trailing Miles to school, to the bookstore, even to Autumn Reyes's house. Malloy noted everything: who they spoke to, how long they stayed, what direction they walked. He scribbled in a black notebook like a man possessed. Marcus Carter, meanwhile, noticed the tale. He always noticed. He didn't say a word to Vanessa, but each night after she went to bed, he stepped outside barefoot, stood in the shadows by the hedges, and stared silently into the darkness where Malloy's car idled. He never flinched, never spoke, and that drove Malloy insane. The final break came one chilly Wednesday evening. Miles had stayed after school late for a debate team meeting. By the time he began the walk home, the streets were near empty and the air thick with silence. He didn't notice the SUV pull up behind him until it was too late. The passenger door flew open. "Miles Carter?" a gruff voice barked. Before he could answer, rough hands grabbed him, yanking him into the vehicle. The world spun as Miles was shoved into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut with a metallic thud, sealing him in. Darkness swallowed the space around him. Windows tinted so deep the streetlights barely pierced through. His heart pounded against his rib cage, but his face remained composed. A voice he recognized sliced through the silence. "You've been a little too calm lately, Miles." Officer Brent Malloy sneered from the driver's seat without turning around. "That's not normal. Not for someone hiding something." Miles didn't answer. "Where's your father right now? He watching? Listening in?" Malloy taunted as he drove down a winding back road off the main stretch of Brookside Ridge. "No? Didn't think so. Let's have a little chat, just us." Malloy's words were jagged, dripping with resentment. He glanced at Miles through the rearview mirror, expecting panic, begging, anything. But the boy remained still, alert, measuring. "See, I did some digging," Malloy continued. "And guess what? Your dad, he doesn't exist. No military ID, no personnel file, just blank pages and redacted reports. You know what that says to me? He's hiding something big." Miles blinked slowly. "Or maybe he's the kind of person your clearance level will never touch." Malloy's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "Smart mouth, just like your dad." The SUV jerked as Malloy swerved off-road onto a forgotten trail that used to lead to an abandoned ranger station. Trees clawed at the sides of the car. Miles leaned slightly to the left, noting landmarks, counting turns, not panicking, calculating. "You know," Malloy said, lowering his voice, "Brookside Ridge used to be a town of order. Then your family showed up, disrupted everything. People like your father don't belong here. People like you, pretending you're better than everyone else." "No one's pretending anything," Miles replied evenly. "We live here. We just don't beg for approval." That pushed Malloy over the edge. The SUV skidded to a stop in the clearing. He got out, yanked the door open, and dragged Miles out by the collar. "You think you're untouchable," he hissed. "Think again." But what Malloy didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that Marcus Carter hadn't lost track of his son for a single second. Because just beyond the ridge, in a parked black sedan, camouflaged by brush and silence, a low-tech military surveillance drone fed a live video feed to a secure encrypted line. Marcus had been watching the entire abduction. The clearing was quiet, but not empty. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the woods whispered with the sound of wind brushing through the leaves. But under that natural stillness lurked something much sharper, Controlled breath, precise movement, silence with intent. Marcus Carter was already there, not in the open, not rushing in like some Hollywood hero, but watching, waiting, concealed behind night-black tactical gear and a veil of patience honed over decades in places the U.S. government would never admit existed. He crouched behind the tree line, eyes steady on the scene unfolding in front of him. In his ear, a voice crackled softly through a comlink. Target confirmed. Audio match on Malloy. Visual confirmation on Miles. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The surveillance team, a small covert military unit stationed on a nearby training base, had re-engaged with him the moment Malloy began prying into his old files. Marcus had told them not to interfere unless it turned into a direct threat to his family. This was now that moment. In the clearing, Malloy paced around Miles like a predator circling prey, his pistol holstered, but his right hand twitching as if itching for confrontation. "You think your dad's going to come running in here like some Navy SEAL?" Malloy barked. "You think he's going to pull a Rambo out of the trees? That only works in movies, boy." Miles stood his ground, jaw clenched but his voice controlled. "You're not angry because you think my dad is dangerous. You're angry because deep down, you know he is." Malloy lunged forward and shoved Miles against a tree. The second his hand made contact, Marcus moved. From the shadows, he surged forward, not recklessly, but with lethal precision. A blur of black. No words. Just the fluid momentum of someone who'd ended wars without making a sound. He reached the clearing in less than 5 seconds. Malloy had barely registered the rustling behind him before his arm was pinned back, his knees kicked out from under him, and his face slammed into the dirt. A low, commanding voice, chilling in its calm, followed. "Get your hands off my son." Malloy struggled, tried to reach for his sidearm, but it was already gone, disarmed in a blink. Marcus didn't punch. He didn't yell. He simply knelt beside the subdued officer, twisting his wrist just enough to keep him immobile, but conscious. "I've been patient," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "But tonight, you crossed a line." Miles, breathing hard now, stood in disbelief, but not fear. He had seen glimpses of this version of his father before. Quiet dominance, measured power. The man who moved like a ghost and struck like steel, but never like this, never to protect him. Just then, headlights flickered in the distance. 2 sets, coming down the trail. Marcus stood, eyes still on Malloy. "It's over," he said. "You just don't know it yet." The headlights grew brighter, bouncing over the rough trail until 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled into the clearing. Their tires crunched to a halt just feet from where Officer Brent Malloy lay face down in the dirt, groaning. The doors opened in near-silent unison. 4 figures stepped out, clean-cut, composed, and unmistakably federal. No badges visible, no words wasted. The leader among them, a black woman in tactical gear with a clipped radio at her shoulder, gave Marcus a slight nod. "Package secured?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "Alive, uninjured. For now." She turned to her team. "Take him." Within seconds, Malloy was hoisted to his feet, his wrists zip-tied behind his back. He snarled at them, lips curling like a trapped animal. "You can't do this. I'm a police officer." The lead agent tilted her head. "You're a rogue actor with a personal vendetta who just kidnapped a minor and crossed into a classified personnel watch list. You've got bigger problems than your badge, Officer Malloy." She handed Marcus a secure satellite phone. "Command wants a statement from you directly. They've been waiting for this to boil over." Miles watched all of it in stunned silence, half in awe, half in disbelief. His father wasn't just respected, he was protected by people who didn't operate under city politics or police unions, people who didn't blink when it came to threats against their own. Marcus walked over to Miles, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You okay?" Miles nodded slowly, but his voice cracked. "I didn't think it would get this bad." Marcus gave a quiet sigh, his features softening in the moonlight. "It got this bad the moment Malloy saw you as a threat instead of a kid. The rest was always coming." One of the agents approached with a tablet, showing infrared aerial footage that had captured Malloy breaking into the Carter home and dragging Miles out through the side gate. Every frame was crystal clear, irrefutable, legal dynamite. "We've already looped in Chief Reeves," the agent said. "He's shaken. Said he'll cooperate fully. Malloy's actions put the whole department at risk." Vanessa arrived moments later in another vehicle, her hospital ID still clipped to her scrubs. She ran straight to Miles, wrapping him in a trembling embrace. "I got the alert," she whispered. "They told me he had you and—" "I'm okay, Mom. Dad got there in time." Vanessa looked at Marcus. For a brief moment, they exchanged a glance layered with unspoken truths. Love, fear, gratitude, and the weight of everything they'd kept hidden to protect their son. Autumn Reyes arrived shortly after, having followed the trail once she realized the scope of what was happening. Her phone still clutched in her hand, camera app open, but for once, she wasn't filming. "Are you all right?" she asked Miles, breathless. "Yeah, it's over." "No," Marcus said quietly, glancing at the agents hauling Malloy into the SUV. "It's just beginning." As the caravan of black vehicles pulled out of the woods, taking Malloy into custody, a hush settled over Brookside Ridge. But it wasn't peace, it was anticipation, the kind that comes before a storm. Marcus Carter turned to his son with steel in his eyes. "They came after our family," he said. "Now the truth comes after them." The air in Brookside Ridge was thick with tension. Word had spread fast. Officer Brent Malloy had gone off the rails. A patrol car was found abandoned, engine still running, on the outskirts of the community park. Security footage from a neighbor's driveway showed Malloy dragging 16-year-old Miles Carter into an unmarked SUV, his face grim, twisted with obsession. By the time authorities started piecing things together, Vanessa Carter was already 3 steps ahead. She stood at the police station, jaw tight, eyes cold, demanding answers. "My son is missing," she said, "and the man responsible is one of your own." Chief Douglas Reeves rubbed his temples. "Mrs. Carter, we've got every available unit out looking." "No," she interrupted, her voice low but sharp. "You don't understand. You're not fast enough." Because somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Carter had already moved. He didn't storm in with sirens. He didn't scream or slam fists on desks. Marcus, as always, operated with quiet precision. A man trained for high-value extractions in enemy territory didn't need dramatics. He needed intel, he needed clarity, and he needed focus. Inside the dim basement of an abandoned foreclosed home on Brookside's south end, Miles sat handcuffed to a metal chair, bruised but unbroken. Officer Malloy paced the room like a man unraveling, weapon holstered but hand-twitching. "You think you're so calm, huh?" Malloy sneered. "Your daddy's secrets won't protect you now. I know he's hiding something. Men like him don't just disappear from military files unless they're ghosts." Miles met his eyes silent. He remembered what his father had taught him in their private backyard drills. A weapon is loud, but the mind, your mind, is silence, and silence commands. Back outside, Marcus stood still behind a cluster of trees across from the abandoned house. Night had just fallen, casting long shadows across the street. He had no headset, no backup, just the silent hum of his instincts and the faint buzz of a satellite phone pinging in his coat pocket. He'd tracked Malloy using a secure channel not even the local precinct had access to. Military-grade surveillance from an old friend in intel. The SUV's last known location lit up on the screen, and now here he was, still as stone, heartbeat steady. The moment was coming, and he wouldn't waste it. Marcus Carter didn't kick the door in. He didn't need to. From across the street, he observed every weakness of the old foreclosed home: its warped frame, rusted fence, the back basement entrance partly hidden behind overgrown hedges. Most people wouldn't have spotted it, but Marcus had spent a lifetime in the shadows. He was trained to see what others missed. He waited. Malloy was pacing again, his angry voice drifting faintly through the open basement window. "You think this is just about you, Miles? This is about your father. Your ghost of a father," Malloy hissed, slamming his hand against the wall. "The files say nothing. No missions, no rank, just redactions. What is he hiding? Who the hell is he?" Still, Miles didn't flinch. He sat there like his father had taught him, spine tall, eyes steady. Let the storm rage. Never match chaos with chaos. Outside, Marcus took a slow breath. The wind rustled through the trees behind him. He moved. Sliding through the hedges, he reached the basement entrance with cat-like ease. No creaks, no missteps, just silence. He removed a slim black tool from his jacket, nothing more than a modified tension wrench and pick, inserted it into the rusty deadbolt, and turned. Click. The door eased open. He stepped into darkness, adjusting his eyes immediately. The basement air was musty and still. A dim bulb flickered ahead. Voices, footsteps, and then silence again. Marcus slipped deeper inside, gliding past moldy boxes and broken furniture. His boots made no sound on the concrete. He crouched behind a stacked set of paint cans, listening. Malloy was ranting now, louder, more erratic. "You think I don't know what this neighborhood is turning into?" he shouted. "First it's your family, then it's more of you. One by one, you think you're going to change Brookside Ridge? You don't belong here. You people never did." That was all Marcus needed to hear. He stepped into view. "Let him go." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried, like steel beneath velvet. Malloy froze. He turned slowly, and for a split second, his face twisted in confusion. Then it cracked into a sneer. "Well, look who showed up," he said, drawing his weapon. "I've been waiting for this moment." Marcus didn't blink. "You're not ready for it." Malloy lunged, aiming the pistol directly at Marcus's chest. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Marcus's hand flashed forward like a cobra strike, his fingers closing over Malloy's wrist with terrifying speed. The gun clattered to the floor. Malloy screamed in pain. "Ah, what are you?" Marcus spun him into the wall, disarming him with a single fluid movement. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't kick. Every move was efficient, disciplined, silent, like clockwork. Behind him, Miles watched, stunned but not afraid. He'd seen his father practice these moves, but never in the real world. Never like this. Marcus pinned Malloy's arm behind his back and shoved him to his knees. He pulled a zip tie from his coat and restrained the officer like he was nothing more than a threat to neutralize. Then Marcus turned to his son. "You all right?" Miles nodded slowly. His voice cracked, but only slightly. "Yeah." The two locked eyes for a long moment. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, heavy. The kind of moment no one else could truly understand but father and son. "I knew you'd come," Miles said softly. Marcus stepped forward and began unlocking the cuffs around his son's wrists. "I always will." Outside, neighbors had begun to gather. Flashlights, raised voices, a few reporters. One girl at the front, Autumn Reyes, held her phone up, recording. It would all be on the news by morning, but none of that mattered to Marcus, because his son was safe, and the threat neutralized. The air outside was thicker now, tense, electric. Blue and red lights danced across the walls of the foreclosed house as the first cruisers from Brookside Ridge PD screeched to a halt. Word had spread fast, too fast. Within minutes, law enforcement, reporters, and residents crowded the cul-de-sac, their faces lit by curiosity, suspicion, and fear. Autumn Reyes stood front and center, her phone still recording. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held steady. Her father had always told her, "In moments like this, stay calm. Truth needs a witness." Inside the house, Marcus Carter stood tall behind his restrained opponent. Officer Brent Malloy, sweating, humiliated and fuming, squirmed on the ground. His badge glinted under the bare bulb above them. But it meant nothing now. Not here. Not to Marcus. From the back of the room, Miles slowly stepped into the light, his wrists red but free. His eyes flicked from his father to the growing scene beyond the broken window. "They're here," Miles said quietly. Marcus gave a single nod. "Then it's time." He didn't flee. He didn't hide. He didn't vanish like the phantom his reputation suggested he could be. Instead, he guided Malloy, still zip-tied and muttering curses, through the basement and up the creaky stairs. The front door opened into a sea of shocked faces. Gasps, phones raised, guns half-drawn. "Don't move!" The first officer, young, white, nervous, took a step forward with his hand on his holster. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus lifted both palms slowly, controlled, his voice calm as ever. "He's the one who needs your attention, not me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Behind the front officers, Chief Douglas Reeves emerged, dressed in his night uniform, grayer than ever, with bags under his eyes that told of too many years trying to keep order in a town built on quiet fault lines. His gaze swept over the scene. Marcus standing still, Malloy subdued, Miles bruised but upright. "What the hell is this?" Reeves asked, more weary than angry. Autumn stepped forward. "I have everything. She pointed at Malloy, "kidnapped Miles, broke into their home, held him at gunpoint." Reeves narrowed his eyes. "Is that true?" Marcus didn't answer with words. He simply turned Malloy to face him. The officer's rage flared again. "They're lying. This kid and his father, this whole damn family is hiding something." Reeves turned to Marcus. "Sir, who exactly are you?" Marcus hesitated. Then for the first time in years, he spoke his title aloud. "Special Operations, Joint Intelligence Task Force, Marcus Carter, identification classified under DoD protocol, but I can provide encrypted verification, if needed." Silence. You could have heard a leaf fall. One of the younger officers whispered, "Holy hell!" Malloy exploded. "He's bluffing! I tried looking him up. Every file is redacted. That's not normal." Reeves snapped, "Exactly. That's very not normal. You're telling me you broke into this man's home, abducted his son, and held them hostage because you couldn't find dirt on him?" Malloy sputtered, "He's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of." Reeves locked eyes with Marcus again. "And yet, here we are, with you in cuffs." Marcus said nothing. His silence was louder than any declaration. From the sidewalk, Autumn raised her phone higher. The lens captured everything. Malloy's breakdown, Marcus's steady posture, Miles standing tall beside his father. The image of control versus chaos, truth versus fear. Reeves finally exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Take him in," he ordered, nodding at Malloy. "But, Chief, now!" Two officers stepped forward and pulled Malloy away. He didn't go quietly. "You're all blind. This isn't over. He's hiding something. You'll see." As the cruiser door slammed shut, the neighborhood felt like it exhaled all at once. Neighbors stepped back. The tension began to break. Pastor Elijah Ford stepped from the crowd, his cane tapping rhythmically on the pavement. "You all right, son?" he asked Miles. Miles nodded. "Thanks to my dad." The old pastor looked up at Marcus. "You're the quiet type, Mr. Carter. But I'm starting to see quiet doesn't mean weak." Marcus simply inclined his head. He didn't need to be thanked. He only needed his son safe. The next hour unfolded in fragments, flashes of conversation, the flutter of camera shutters, and murmured awe. Yet in the middle of it all, Marcus Carter stood still, like the eye of a storm that had finally passed. His presence commanded respect not through bluster or force, but through restraint, through quiet, through truth. Chief Douglas Reeves returned from speaking with federal agents over the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he lowered the receiver. He walked back toward Marcus and Vanessa, who had just arrived at the scene, still in her hospital shoes, her eyes searching until they found her son. She didn't run. She walked with purpose, gathered Miles in her arms, and held him longer than she ever had in public. "I'm okay, Mom," Miles whispered. "I know you are," she replied, voice breaking, "but you shouldn't have to be." Chief Reeves cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone clipped but respectful, "I've just been advised that your record has been sealed at levels I don't have the clearance to even ask about. The Pentagon confirmed your identity and, well, that's above my pay grade." Marcus nodded once, offering no further explanation. There was nothing to prove. Reeves continued, his voice softening. "What I saw tonight, how you handled yourself, that's something my officers could learn from. You didn't come here looking for war. You came for your son." "Yes," Marcus said, his first word to the chief all evening. "And that officer, Malloy, he was way out of line. We're pursuing charges for unlawful entry, abduction, excessive force, and impersonation while under suspension." Marcus didn't react, but Vanessa stepped in. "And what about accountability? What about the systems that let him spiral this far without anyone stopping him?" Reeves hesitated, then he nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll make sure there's a full internal review. I owe your family that much." But it wasn't just about one family anymore. Autumn Raya's livestream had gone viral. Her footage, raw and unfiltered, showed not only the arrest, but the restraint Marcus Carter used in subduing a man who had endangered his son. The internet dubbed it the silent stand. Viewers across the country saw something rare. Black fatherhood painted in dignity and strength, not fear and reaction. By the next morning, Marcus Carter's name was being whispered on news programs, debated in online forums, and honored in quiet church halls where people like Pastor Elijah Ford reminded their congregations. The most dangerous man in the room is often the one who says the least. A week later, at Brookside Ridge Town Hall, a community meeting was held. Packed beyond capacity, residents gathered not out of obligation, but out of a need to understand what had just unfolded in their backyard. At the center of it all stood the Carter family, no longer unknown, no longer invisible. Vanessa addressed the crowd first, poised, articulate. She spoke of trust eroded and regained, of motherhood forged in worry, of a community's duty to its children. Then Marcus took the podium. No preamble, no microphone adjustment, just a father, finally seen. "I've lived in a world most of you will never see," he began. "My job has taken me to places where evil has no mask, where silence is the only way to survive. But what happened to my son didn't occur in a war zone. It happened here, at home." He looked down briefly, then back at the audience. "I didn't come here to shame this town. I came here because my son deserves to grow up safe, and because no child should have to prove their worth just to walk home." Applause started slowly, then grew. Outside the meeting, young black boys stood a little taller. Parents asked harder questions. Officers like Reeves listened more closely. Back at home that evening, Miles sat in the living room flipping through a history textbook. The house was quiet again, but something had changed. Not just the locks or the new perimeter cameras Marcus had installed. Something deeper. He looked up as his father entered the room, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "You don't usually drink tea," Miles said with a smirk. Marcus handed him a cup anyway. "Figured I'd make an exception. You've earned it." They sat for a moment in silence before Miles spoke. "Why didn't you fight back harder when he grabbed me?" You could have, because you were watching, Marcus interrupted softly, and I wanted you to remember how to fight without losing yourself. Miles nodded, the lesson sinking in, not from theory, but from lived experience. Was it hard? Holding back? Marcus looked at his son with the same intensity he'd faced down Malloy with. Every second. Somewhere outside Brookside Ridge, in a federal building where records don't exist in names or code, someone updated Marcus Carter's file. Non-lethal field intervention, civilian incident, resolved with honor. That was all. But in Brookside Ridge, the resolution was more than honorable. It was transformative. And for one family who'd once lived hidden behind routine and redacted silence, the world had finally seen the strength that doesn't shout, only stands. The town hall of Brookside Ridge had never seen a crowd like this. Rows of metal folding chairs were filled long before the 6 p.m. meeting, leaving dozens of residents pressed shoulder to shoulder along the back walls, spilling into the hallway. News crews buzzed like flies outside, camera lights flashing as reporters angled for live shots. The national spotlight had found them, and there was no retreating into suburban silence now. At the front of the chamber, Mayor Ellen Carter shuffled papers nervously, her voice a practiced calm that barely masked her unease. "We will maintain order," she said into the mic. "I know this is emotional, but we are here tonight to listen." But the murmurs only grew louder. Then the door opened. Marcus Carter stepped inside with quiet poise, not in uniform, not flanked by agents, but simply as a father. Vanessa was beside him, composed, elegant, and Miles, the boy at the center of it all, stood tall and calm despite the storm that had swirled around him for weeks. The room hushed. Eyes followed them with a complicated mix of guilt, admiration, and uncertainty. When Marcus took the podium, he didn't begin with outrage. No fist slammed, no voice raised. Instead, he looked out at the people of Brookside Ridge, his neighbors, and simply said, "What happened to my son could have happened to yours. But you wouldn't know, because the system was never built to stop for him." The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the crowded room. "You may think this is about one officer," he continued. "It's not. Officer Malloy is not the disease. He's a symptom. The deeper illness is a system that teaches some people their authority matters more than someone else's dignity. That suspicion can be justified if it's cloaked in a badge. That silence is safety." Several in the room shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the second row, Mrs. Jensen, who once watched Miles walk home like he didn't belong, lowered her eyes. At the back, Pastor Elijah Ford, hands folded tightly, gave a subtle nod. "My son was taught to speak respectfully, keep his hands visible, lower his tone in the face of provocation," Marcus said, his voice steady. "He followed every rule. He did nothing wrong, and yet he was stopped, humiliated, arrested, and nearly taken from us. If that can happen to Miles, a quiet, respectful honor student, what does that say about who we are as a community?" Some of the crowd murmured in agreement. Others looked away, ashamed, unsure. Vanessa Carter rose and joined her husband at the podium. "I've worked at the local hospital for over a decade," she said. "I've held the hands of your children during surgery. I've sat with your mothers during their final breaths. And yet someone still looked at my child and saw a threat instead of a son." Her voice trembled for only a second. "You don't have to be hateful to be harmful," she added. "You just have to look away." The room held its breath. Outside the building, protest signs bobbed above the heads of a mixed crowd. Young and old, black and white, outraged and awakened. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from defense to reflection. Mayor Carter cleared her throat but didn't speak. Not yet. Not while the truth still hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Marcus glanced at his son, then back to the audience. "We're not asking for special treatment," he said quietly. We're asking for equal protection, for accountability, for a reform that means something. The silence was thick, uncomfortable for some, necessary for others. Marcus stepped back from the podium, not in retreat, but as a quiet challenge. The truth had been spoken. Now it was the community's turn to respond. After a long pause, Chief Douglas Reeves rose from his seat near the wall. He adjusted his glasses, his uniform crisp, but his eyes heavy with years. "I've served this town for over 3 decades," he said. "I've seen it grow. I've seen it struggle. And I've seen where we failed." Some murmurs followed, but Reeves held his ground. "I approved Officer Malloy's transfer into this department," he admitted. "I saw the military record, I saw the edge, but I told myself it'd smooth over. I thought he just needed structure. I didn't listen when the first complaints came in. I didn't act fast enough. And because of that, a young man was nearly destroyed." He turned to the Carters, visibly pained. "To your family, I failed you. And to this community, I owe more than an apology. I owe you reform." The room began to shift. What had started as tension began to feel like momentum. Autumn Reyes, seated near the front with her camera still in hand, spoke up. "Then start by listening to us. Don't sweep this under the rug with a press release. We want a citizens review board. We want body cams. We want training that actually means something, not a PowerPoint and a free lunch." Applause erupted. Loud, real. Chief Reeves nodded. "Done," he said simply. "We'll build that board with people from every corner of Brookside Ridge. And I want the Carter family involved if you're willing." Marcus exchanged a glance with Vanessa. "We'll be there," she said. "But we're not here to fix the system alone. This town built it. This town needs to change it." Reverend Elijah Ford stepped forward from the back of the room, cane tapping softly. "You can't heal what you won't face," he said. "Brookside Ridge has faced its denial for long enough. Tonight, we start something new." The crowd stood, not by command, but by conviction. Young people raised their phones not to record a scandal, but to witness a shift. Outside the town hall, the warm Virginia evening buzzed with something Brookside Ridge hadn't felt in years: purpose. Neighbors who'd never spoken were suddenly exchanging stories, shaking hands, forming plans. Teens who once walked through their neighborhoods with eyes down and shoulders tight stood taller now, emboldened by Miles Carter's quiet strength and his father's resolve. News vans had long since packed up, but the real coverage had already happened. On live streams, in school group chats, in community threads that hadn't seen this much activity since the last mayoral election. But this wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. Back inside, Chief Reeves and a small committee of local leaders, Pastor Elijah Ford, Luther Ellis, and Eugene Hill, had already begun outlining the next steps. Autumn Reyes sat nearby, typing furiously into her laptop. "I've already got the first op-ed drafted," she said aloud, her voice steady but excited. "From shadow to spotlight, how one family shook a sleeping town. Think it's too bold?" Pastor Ford chuckled gently. "Child, sometimes bold is the only way to speak truth." Autumn smiled. She looked over at Miles, seated quietly next to his mother. He still wasn't one for the spotlight, but his composure had become a beacon for others. Some of the same classmates who once parroted their parents' quiet bias were now seeing him differently, no longer as just that quiet black kid, but as someone who had withstood the full weight of a broken system without ever losing himself. Marcus stood near the back, arms crossed, gaze scanning the room like he always did, evaluating, protecting, planning 3 moves ahead. But tonight, his body was at rest. His mission wasn't over, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was fighting it alone. As the meeting wrapped up, Chief Reeves approached the Carters. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I do promise action." Vanessa Carter offered a small nod, the kind that held both grace and steel. We'll hold you to it. Outside, Eugene Hill walked alongside Luther Ellis, his voice low but firm. You think this town can really change after all these years? Luther shrugged. Change ain't a moment, Eugene. It's a practice. And tonight, folks finally showed up. Across Brookside Ridge, porch lights stayed on a little later than usual. Conversations happened around dinner tables that had been silent for too long. And at the Carter home, as Miles stepped onto the porch for some air, his father joined him, silent, steady. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. Change had begun. It didn't happen overnight. Justice rarely does. But in Brookside Ridge, Virginia, the aftermath of the warehouse standoff marked a shift that could be felt in the streets. Officer Brent Malloy was arrested within 24 hours of being subdued by Marcus Carter. The charges were grave: kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, impersonating an officer, and unlawful surveillance. But perhaps more damning than any legal indictment was the wave of public outrage that followed. For the first time in decades, the suburban quiet of Brookside Ridge was disrupted not by fear, but by collective conscience. Parents showed up at school board meetings demanding protection for their children. Local journalists traced Malloy's history and uncovered a troubling pattern. Discretionary stops targeting Black and Latino teens, complaints that had been quietly shelved, warning signs ignored. And then came the reckoning inside the department. Chief Douglas Reeves, once the embodiment of cautious neutrality, sat stone-faced at a press conference aired on every local channel. As of this morning, I am submitting my resignation, he said simply. Our department failed to protect every citizen equally, and as its leader, that failure is mine to bear. It was a quiet resignation, without excuses or self-pity, but it shook the town. The words echoed not only through City Hall, but in grocery stores, barbershops, and church pews. Even those who once dismissed Miles Carter as just another kid had watched the footage. His calm, his restraint, his refusal to retaliate, and were left with no choice but to reconsider what they thought they knew. The Carters, meanwhile, chose silence, not out of fear, but strategy. Vanessa returned to her work at the hospital, her public demeanor unshaken. Miles focused on his studies, his circle of friends expanding now with classmates who once kept their distance. And Marcus? He kept moving, quietly, purposefully, behind the scenes. A month after Malloy's arrest, a new sign appeared on Main Street. The Carter Center for Leadership and Discipline, coming soon. The building was a former auto repair garage, stripped down and being rebuilt from the inside out. No flashy banners, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just purpose. Marcus Carter didn't open a dojo or a self-defense gym. What he created was something deeper, a place where boys and girls of all backgrounds could learn how to stand tall before the world tried to shrink them, where they'd be taught not only how to disarm a threat, but how to master their breathing in the face of chaos, where leadership didn't mean shouting loudest but listening hardest. Outside the center on its opening day stood Pastor Elijah Ford, flanked by Eugene Hill and Luther Ellis, three elders from Brookside Ridge who had seen generations come and go. "We prayed for this day," Reverend Ford said, voice hoarse with emotion, "not just for justice, but for direction. And Marcus, you're giving our kids a compass." Marcus, standing beside them in simple jeans and a worn military tee, nodded solemnly. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what we build next." The Carter Center for Leadership and Discipline opened its doors that summer with no advertisements, just word of mouth. And still, it was full on day one. Inside, the space was nothing flashy. Exposed brick walls, padded mats, a chalkboard with handwritten quotes about integrity, balance, and courage. There were no trophies on display, no flags on the walls, and no mirrors. Marcus had insisted on that. This isn't about watching yourself, it's about seeing others. Each session began not with drills, but with a circle. Students sat cross-legged as Marcus led a breathing exercise, followed by questions, sometimes quiet ones like, "What does strength mean to you?" And sometimes harder ones, "When have you felt unseen?" Or, "What do you do when anger finds you?" The first time Miles spoke in that circle, his voice was low but steady. "When Officer Malloy grabbed me, I felt small, but I remembered what my dad taught me. Calm isn't weakness, it's preparation." A hush fell over the room, not out of shock, but respect. Even the younger kids, fidgety and distracted moments earlier, turned toward him. From that day on, they listened when Miles spoke, not because he was the son of someone important, but because he lived the kind of courage they'd only seen in movies. Marcus watched his son carefully. He didn't praise him in front of the others. That wasn't his style. But later that night, after locking up the center, he placed a firm hand on Miles's shoulder. "You lead well," he said, "not with noise, with presence." Word of the center spread, first among parents, then teachers, then across neighboring towns. And eventually media crews showed up, not for scandal this time, but to ask how a town like Brookside Ridge, once known for silent bias, had birthed something so profound. "Are you training future soldiers?" one reporter asked Marcus during an impromptu interview. "No," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I'm training future protectors of their peace, their voice, their people. Some of them may wear uniforms. Most won't. Doesn't matter. What matters is that when the moment comes, they'll know how to stand without striking." Community leaders who once avoided difficult conversations now found themselves at round tables beside Vanessa Carter, who quietly helped shape policies on racial equity, school discipline reform, and community health access. She never mentioned what had happened to Miles. She didn't have to. Her presence was a reminder that grace and strength weren't opposites. They were allies. The town began to change, slowly, not perfectly, but genuinely. A new police chief was hired, Clarence Dunn, a black former U.S. Marshal with a reputation for integrity. One of his first acts in office was to personally meet with every student at Brookside Ridge High. "This uniform doesn't make me right," he told them. "It makes me responsible. Hold me to that." Weeks after Chief Clarence Dunn's appointment, a mural appeared overnight on the side of the abandoned building across from the Carter Center. No artist claimed it, but everyone in Brookside Ridge knew who it honored. The mural depicted a young black boy standing tall in the center of a storm, wind swirling around him, but his feet planted firm. Behind him, shadowed but unmistakable, stood the silhouette of a man, strong, calm, watchful. Beneath them, a single phrase, "Still standing, still leading." Autumn Reyes was the first to post a photo of it, captioned simply, "We don't forget, we grow." Her video from the original arrest had reached over 4 million views now. She'd since been invited to speak at conferences for young journalists, but she stayed grounded, always bringing the conversation back to Miles, back to truth. "He wasn't just my friend," she once told a room of students. "He was my reminder that courage isn't about shouting. It's about knowing who you are when someone's trying to take that away from you." The town began a series of healing circles, open public forums hosted monthly at the community center, where residents could speak their truth. It wasn't always comfortable. At the first one, an elderly white man stood and confessed he used to cross the street when he saw black teens walking his way. "I was wrong," he said, hands shaking, "and I want to say that before I die." Luther Ellis, the 82-year-old Navy vet who had stood by Marcus during the town hall, stood next. "You owned it. That's more than most. That's how we start." Eugene Hill, the retired postal worker, began organizing weekly neighborhood check-ins, not surveillance but fellowship. Lawn chairs, lemonade, and open ears. And at the Carter home, something else began to shift. Peace, once guarded like a fragile treasure, now had room to breathe. Vanessa returned to gardening, something she'd abandoned during the height of the crisis. Miles helped her replant the jasmine near the front porch. "Smells like home again," she said quietly. One evening, Marcus found Miles standing in front of the mural, looking up at it in silence. "I don't feel like a symbol," Miles said softly. "I still feel like a kid who got cuffed for walking home." Marcus nodded. "You are, and you're also more." "I didn't want this," Miles admitted. "No one does," his father replied. "But now that it's here, you get to choose what you do with it." And choose he did. Miles began mentoring younger boys at the center. He didn't teach them how to fight. He taught them how to breathe through fear, how to stay still when the world demanded anger, how to recognize the line between pride and principle. The most powerful lesson he shared came quietly one afternoon when a boy asked, "What if they try to break me down again?" Miles paused, then said, "Then remember who you are before they tried." And for the first time, the boy smiled. By fall, the Carter Center was more than just a youth academy. It had become the emotional cornerstone of Brookside Ridge. What started as a quiet project born from survival had evolved into a legacy in motion. Boys and girls, black and white, filled the echoing gym with laughter, sweat, in lessons that went far deeper than physical skill. Leadership seminars were hosted every Saturday morning, where Marcus taught not just self-defense, but situational control, verbal de-escalation, and the mindset of a protector, not a warrior. His motto was etched into a wooden plaque above the main entrance: "Discipline before strength, integrity before action." Vanessa, ever the quiet anchor, oversaw the center's health and nutrition programs. She ensured that every student had access to fresh meals, school supplies, and when needed, counseling. She also helped other parents, especially mothers, find their voice in community affairs. One day, Chief Dunn visited the center unannounced. He watched in silence as Marcus guided a group of teens through a trust exercise, then sat quietly with him afterward. "I used to think policing was about control," Dunn confessed, "but this is what real safety looks like." Marcus didn't gloat. He just nodded and offered the chief a chair for the next class. And Brent Malloy? Now awaiting trial, he sat in a federal detention center miles away, largely forgotten by the town that had once turned a blind eye to his aggression. There were no rallies in his defense, no blue line flags waving for him in Brookside Ridge. The silence was louder than any protest. When asked by reporters if he had any comment on Marcus Carter, Malloy only muttered, "Man like that should have never been hiding in plain sight." But even he knew, deep down, it was his own blindness that cost him everything. As winter approached, the jasmine bloomed out of season at the Carter house. Vanessa said it was a sign. Marcus called it resilience. And Miles? He didn't say much. He just kept showing up, taller now, a little older, and exactly who his father had hoped he'd become. Not a symbol, a seed, planted in injustice, watered by truth, and growing into something that might just change the world. Brookside Ridge looked like the kind of place where nothing truly bad could ever happen. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and neighbors who waved politely. But underneath that postcard-perfect surface, the story of the Carter family revealed a truth that far too many American families know. Injustice doesn't need a siren to arrive. It often comes in silence, wrapped in suspicion, and disguised as just doing my job. The story of Marcus and Miles Carter isn't just about a father protecting his son. It's about what happens when integrity meets oppression, when quiet strength confronts loud authority, and when a community is finally forced to face the truths it spent years avoiding. At its core, This is a story about how we respond when we are seen as a threat just for existing. Miles Carter was just a teenager walking home. No crime committed, no wrong turn taken, and yet he found himself face to face with a police officer who didn't see a student. He saw a suspect. What followed was a disturbing but all too familiar encounter. Questioning without cause, accusations without evidence, and suspicion based solely on appearance. But Miles, raised in a home where calm was not weakness but preparation, responded with poise. Not fear, not defiance, just clarity. And that alone disrupted the power dynamic. Officer Malloy wasn't just threatened by who Miles was, he was threatened by the dignity with which Miles carried himself. Lesson number 1, dignity is disarming. In a world that often mistakes silence for submission, Miles showed us that there's nothing more powerful than a young black boy who knows his worth and stands in it. Unshaken. His ability to hold his ground without matching aggression with aggression speaks volumes in a culture that often teaches boys, especially boys of color, that they must be loud or angry to be heard. But Miles's composure didn't appear overnight. It was cultivated by a father whose entire life had been built in the shadows of global conflict and a mother whose grace in crisis could calm any storm. Marcus Carter is a man whose resume is sealed, whose operations were whispered about in corners of the Pentagon, and whose face shows up redacted in government records. But to his son, he is simply Dad, the man who teaches restraint before reaction, silence before escalation, and strategy over ego. And when his son's life was threatened, Marcus didn't storm the police station or blast his rage on national television. He didn't need to. He let truth be the loudest voice in the room and waited until the time was right to reveal it. Lesson number 2, strength isn't how hard you hit, it's how long you can hold your ground without breaking. Marcus's decision to let the system reveal itself, to let Malloy's obsession spiral into self-destruction, wasn't about being passive. It was about principle. He knew that fighting fire with fire only leaves ashes. What he chose instead was accountability through exposure. He let the world see exactly how far someone would go to tear down a family that didn't flinch in the face of scrutiny. When Officer Malloy kidnapped Miles, it became more than harassment. It became criminal. It became the moment that ripped the mask off of every whispered bias, every ignored complaint, every policy that claimed to serve all but protected only some. Yet even then, Marcus didn't destroy. He restrained. He subdued.